My name doesn't matter much anymore, but for the sake of telling this right, I'll tell you the people in town used to call me Buck. 68 years old this past March, widowed for going on 5 years now since my wife Helene passed from the cancer that ate through her in 11 brutal months. We had one daughter. Her name was Marigold, but she went by Goldie her whole life, even on her business cards. I was buttoning the cuff of my good blue shirt when the phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a Sunday in October. The kind of Sunday where the light comes in slanted through the kitchen window and makes you remember every Sunday before it. I was supposed to be at Goldie's house in 40 minutes. She'd called me Thursday saying she was making her mother's pot roast, the one Helen used to make with the carrots cut on a bias and the gravy thick enough to coat a spoon. Goldie had never made it before, not once in all the years since her mother died. I thought maybe she was finally trying to come back to me a little. Maybe she was finally ready to talk about her mother without changing the subject. The phone buzzed again, then again. Then it rang. It was my lawyer, Sterling McGrath. Sterling had been my attorney for 31 years. He'd handled the sale of my first warehouse, the buyout when I sold the freight company, the trust we set up for Helene's care. Sterling didn't call on Sundays. Sterling didn't call at all, unless I called him first. Sterling sent letters and emails and had his paralegal handle anything that needed a phone. "Buck," he said when I picked up. His voice was different. Tight. "Where are you right now?" "My bedroom." "Putting my shirt on. I'm headed to Goldie's for supper." "Don't." I laughed a little because I thought it was a joke. Sterling has a dry way about him. "What do you mean, don't?" "I mean, don't get in your truck. Don't drive over there. Buck, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not interrupt. Can you do that?" I sat down on the edge of the bed. My knee popped. I remember that detail because it was the last normal thing my body did before everything stopped feeling normal. I'm listening. "I got a courier delivery yesterday afternoon. I would have called you Friday, but it came in late and I needed to verify some things before I told you. Buck, your daughter filed paperwork with the probate court. She's petitioning for involuntary guardianship. She's claiming you're not mentally competent to manage your own affairs." The room went quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen down the hall. I could hear a dog barking somewhere outside. I could hear my own breath going in and out, and it sounded loud. "That's a mistake," I said. "That's got to be a mistake." "It's not a mistake. I have the petition in front of me. It's signed by her and by her husband. They're listing themselves as co-guardians. They want control of your accounts, your house, the rental properties, the trust money, everything." I didn't say anything for a long time. Sterling waited. He's a patient man, always has been. "She's making me pot roast tonight," I said finally. It was the stupidest thing I could have said, but it was what came out of my mouth. "Buck, listen. There's a doctor named in the paperwork, a psychiatrist out of Asheville, who's apparently going to evaluate you. The petition mentions that you've been exhibiting signs of cognitive decline, confusion, forgetfulness, erratic financial decisions. Buck, did you go to a doctor recently and not tell me about it?" "No. I had my regular checkup at Dr. Pham in August. He said I was fit as a man 20 years younger." And that's what I thought. So this doctor in Asheville's never met you, which means either he's planning to evaluate you tonight at that dinner, or he's already prepared to sign something without ever seeing you. Both options are bad. Both options are illegal, but the second one is worse and frankly easier to pull off than people think if you know the right doctor. I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to somebody else. "Buck, I need you to not go to that house. I don't know what they have planned tonight, but I know it's not pot roast. Maybe they want him to come during dinner and ambush you. Maybe they want you to sign something. Maybe they just want a witness to testify later that you seemed off, that you couldn't follow conversation. I don't know, but I'm telling you, as your lawyer, and as the man who watched you bury your wife and stand back up afterward, do not go to that house tonight." I sat back down on the bed. I looked at my reflection in the closet door mirror. A man with white hair, combed back the way he'd combed it for 50 years. A man in a blue shirt he'd ironed himself that morning. A man who was about to drive to his daughter's house with a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums in his truck, because yellow was her mother's favorite. "Sterling," I said. "Is this real?" "It's real, Buck. I'm sorry. It's real." I told him I'd call him back. I hung up. I sat there for I don't know how long. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been 30. The light moved across the floor. The dog stopped barking. Somewhere in the house, a clock I forgot we had ticked. My daughter Goldie was 41 years old. She'd been a difficult baby and a difficult teenager and a difficult adult. But she was my baby. Helene used to say Goldie had two settings, charming and feral, and Helene loved her so completely that the feral never bothered her. After Helene died, Goldie went cold on me. Not cruel. Just cold. She stopped calling. Stopped coming by. Her husband, Trent, ran a real estate development company that wasn't doing as well as he liked to pretend. They had one son, my grandson, a 15-year-old named Wesley, who I hadn't seen in nearly a year because Goldie always had a reason he couldn't come. About 6 months ago, something changed. Goldie started calling again, started inviting me over, started asking about my health, about my doctors, about whether I'd thought about downsizing, about whether the old farmhouse was getting to be too much for me. She brought me casseroles. She sent Wesley with a card on Father's Day. She told me she was sorry she'd been so distant after Mom died. I thought she was healing. I thought we were healing. I called Sterling back. I told him I wasn't going to the dinner. He said good. He said come to his office tomorrow morning at 8. He said, in the meantime, write down every conversation I could remember having with Goldie in the last 6 months. Every offhand comment about my memory. Every time she'd asked me to repeat a story. Every time she'd brought up moving me somewhere. Every time she'd had Trent in the room when we talked about money. I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a ballpoint pen, and I started writing. I wrote until the sun went down and I had to turn on the overhead light. I filled 12 pages, and while I was writing, I started to see the shape of it. The thing she'd been building. The way she'd asked me a question I'd already answered the week before, and then look at Trent like, "See what I told you?" The way she started recording our phone calls, in case I forget what you said, Daddy. My memory's terrible. The way she'd brought up the farmhouse maintenance every single time we talked, and how Trent happened to mention his friend who owned a very nice memory care community outside of Charlotte, just for when the time comes. No rush. She'd been collecting. 6 months of collecting. And I've been sitting there feeling grateful that my daughter was finally coming back to me. At 9 that night I called her. I told her I had food poisoning, probably the chicken salad from the diner. I told her I was sorry to miss dinner. I told her I loved her. She didn't say it back. She said, "Feel better, Daddy," and she hung up before I could say goodbye. I sat with the phone in my hand, and I understood, fully, for the first time, that the woman I'd just spoken to was not my daughter anymore. Or maybe she'd never been my daughter the way I'd thought she was. Either way, the woman on the other end of that line had been waiting for a specific outcome tonight. And my food poisoning had cost her something. And her voice when she hung up was the voice of a person who would try again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the leather chair by the window and watched the yard. Around 4 in the morning, a deer came up almost to the porch and looked at me through the glass. I looked back at her. Neither of us moved for a long time. Then she walked off into the dark, and I thought, somehow, that I'd been seen by something that knew what was coming. Sterling's office is in a renovated brick building downtown that used to be a feed store. I was there at 7:45 with the thermos of coffee and the 12 pages of legal pad notes. Sterling met me at the door himself. His paralegal wasn't in yet. He locked the door behind me. "I called a friend of mine last night," Sterling said. "Hannah Birdwell. She's a forensic geriatric psychiatrist out of Duke. She owes me a favor from a case 10 years ago. She's going to see you Wednesday morning. Full evaluation. We're going to get you a clean bill of mental health from a doctor whose reputation is unimpeachable. and we're going to have it in hand before your daughter's doctor in Asheville ever lays eyes on you." He paused. "I also called a private investigator. Her name is Renee Doucette. She does asset tracing and surveillance for divorces and probate cases. She's the best in 3 states. She started on Trent's company yesterday at 5 p.m. By this morning, she'd already found something." "What?" "His development company is 6 months from bankruptcy. He's got a personally guaranteed loan with a balloon payment due in February that he cannot make. He's also got an ongoing affair with a woman who works at his title company, which I mention only because it suggests his judgment is not what it could be, and his finances are worse than they look on paper. Buck, they don't want your money someday. They need it now. They need it by February, or they lose everything." I drank my coffee. It had gone cold. "What do we do, Sterling?" He took off his reading glasses and folded them and set them on his desk. "We let them think they're winning. We don't tell them we know. We don't confront her. We don't change a thing about how you act around her. You go to the next dinner and the one after that. You let her ask her questions. You answer them clearly and consistently, and you let her think you're a confused old man, if that's what she wants to see. Meanwhile, we build a wall around you that they cannot get through. We document everything. We preempt their doctor. We compile evidence on Trent's finances and the affair. We update your trust and your will and your power of attorney so that even in the worst-case scenario where a judge somehow rules against you, the money is already structured in a way they can't touch. And when they file their petition, we don't just defend Buck. We counter. We bring the whole thing down on top of them." I looked at him for a long moment. "What if I don't want to bring it down on her, Sterling? What if I just want her to stop?" He looked back at me with a kind of sadness that I hadn't seen on his face since my wife's funeral. "Buck, she filed paperwork to take your life away from you. She found a doctor willing to lie about your mental state. She's been recording your phone calls for 6 months. People who do that don't stop because you ask them to. They stop because you make them." I nodded. I knew he was right. Driving home from his office that morning, I passed the elementary school Goldie went to. I passed the park where Helene and I used to take her to feed the ducks. I passed the bakery where I used to buy her a maple donut every Saturday morning when she was 8. The town was still my town. The streets were still the streets. But something underneath it had shifted, and I drove the rest of the way home with both hands tight on the wheel, and a feeling in my chest like a stone had taken up residence behind my ribs. The next Sunday I went to dinner. I wore the same blue shirt. I brought a different bouquet, white this time. I parked in the driveway, and I walked up the steps, and I rang the doorbell, and when Goldie opened the door and smiled and said, "Daddy, come in," I smiled back and kissed her cheek and said, "It's so good to see you, sweetheart." And I meant the kiss, but I did not mean the smile, and that was a new thing in me. That ability to separate the two. Trent was in the living room. He was tall and good-looking in a way that had always seemed slightly polished to me, like a salesman in a suit that fit too well. He clapped me on the shoulder and asked how the drive was. I said the drive was fine. Wesley was at the table already. My grandson. 15 years old, all elbows and knees, hair flopping in his eyes. He looked up at me and something passed across his face that I couldn't read. Not happy, not unhappy, watchful. He said hi, Grandpa, in a quiet voice and went back to his phone. The pot roast was on the table. It looked like Helene's. It even smelled like Helene's. Goldie had clearly tried hard. We sat down and she said grace, which was a new thing, and we passed the platters around and we started eating. "So, Daddy," she said about 10 minutes in, "I was talking to Trent the other day about the farmhouse. There it was. Right on schedule. What about it?" "Well, we were just worried about you out there alone. The driveway gets so bad in the winter. And the gutters are higher than they used to be. You know what I mean? It's a lot of house for one person. I manage." "I know you do. I know. But have you given any thought to what we talked about? About maybe touring some of those communities just to see what's out there?" I looked at her. I looked at her like a father looks at his daughter. I let my face go soft. Sweetheart, I think about it. I do. It's just hard to imagine leaving the house. Your mother's there, you know. In a way. She put her hand on mine. Mom would want you to be safe, Daddy. I know she would. I looked down at my plate. I looked back up at her. I let my eyes go just a little vacant. What were we talking about? It was the smallest thing. The smallest gesture. But I saw it. I saw the flick of her eyes to Trent. I saw the tiny lift at the corner of his mouth. I saw Wesley, across the table, watch his mother watch his father. And I saw Wesley's hand tighten on his fork. The farmhouse, Daddy. We were talking about the farmhouse. Right. Of course. The farmhouse. I ate my pot roast. I made small talk. I praised the gravy and told Goldie her mother would have been proud of her, and I watched her face when I said it, and I saw nothing there at all. Not pleasure. Not pain. Nothing. She said, "Thank you, Daddy," and reached for the salt. After dinner, when Goldie was in the kitchen and Trent was in his study taking what he said was an urgent work call, Wesley walked past me in the hallway and slipped a piece of paper into my hand without looking at me. He kept walking. He went up the stairs. He didn't look back. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I unfolded the paper. It said, in handwriting I knew from old birthday cards, Grandpa, "They are going to put you somewhere. I have been recording them. I will find a way to give you the recordings. Do not let them know I know. Please, I love you." Well, I sat on the toilet lid with the paper in my hand, and I cried. I cried as silently as I could, and I cried until my chest ached. Then I washed my face, and I flushed the paper, and I went back out to the living room, and I drank the coffee Goldie poured me, and I let her tell me a story about her work that I had heard before. And I said, "Oh, I don't think you've told me that one, sweetheart." And I watched her smile, and I knew that my grandson, that 15-year-old boy upstairs, was the only one of us at that table doing anything good. The evaluation with Dr. Birdwell on Wednesday took 4 hours. She tested my memory, my reasoning, my spatial awareness, my executive function. She asked me about my finances and had me explain my investment portfolio from memory. She asked me about my medications and my history and my daily routines. She asked me to draw a clock face showing the time 3:45. She asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. She asked me to recall 5 unrelated words after 20 minutes of conversation. I scored, she told Sterling later, in the 98th percentile for a man my age. My cognitive function was, in her words, exceptional. She signed an affidavit that day. Sterling had it notarized that afternoon and filed under seal with the court. The private investigator, Renee Doucette, met with me the following Monday. She came to my house. She brought a folder, and we sat at my kitchen table, where I had once helped Goldie with her algebra homework. The folder was thicker than I expected. Trent's company, Heartline Development, was 3 months further along the road to bankruptcy than Sterling had originally estimated. 2 of his commercial properties were in pre-foreclosure. He had borrowed against his and Goldie's house twice in the last 18 months. The woman from the title company, a woman in her early 30s named Caroline somebody, had been receiving cash gifts and a leased Audi that he had hidden inside the company books as a vendor expense. But the worst was the psychiatrist in Asheville. Dr. Roland Pache-Renee had spent 4 days on him. He had been the subject of 2 prior complaints to the state medical board for diagnostic irregularities in guardianship cases. Both complaints had been dismissed, but the pattern was visible if you looked. He charged $5,000 cash for a rapid intake evaluation that consisted of a single home visit. He had a working relationship with 2 attorneys in Charlotte who specialized in fast-tracking incapacity rulings for adult children of elderly homeowners. Renee had photographs of Trent meeting with Dr. Pesh in a Charlotte parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in September. They had exchanged an envelope. I looked at those photographs for a long time. Trent in his good suit, Dr. Pesh in khakis and a windbreaker, an envelope. My life inside that envelope. What's in the envelope? I asked Renee. My guess is the first half of his fee. He's a cash-on-delivery man. He gets the rest after the diagnosis is filed with the court. I put the photographs down. Renee, can you find out where my grandson's recordings are? She tilted her head. What recordings? I told her about Wesley. About the note. She listened without interrupting. Has he given you anything since the dinner? She asked. No, he doesn't have a way. His mother monitors his phone. He's homeschooled this year. She told me last year it was for his anxiety, but I think it was so she could keep him in the house. Renee wrote something down in her notebook. I'll figure it out. Don't reach out to him directly. If she catches a message between the two of you, it's over. For 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. In one, I was a man going about his ordinary business. I went to the hardware store. I had lunch on Tuesdays with my friend Beau at the diner. I went to church Sunday morning and Sunday supper at my daughter's house Sunday evening. I drank her coffee. I praised her cooking. I let her ask me questions about my finances, and I gave her vague answers that sounded like the answers of a man who is losing his grip on the details. I asked her to remind me what we discussed last week. I called Trent by Wesley's name twice, on purpose, and saw the satisfaction blink across my daughter's face both times. In the other life, I was building a wall. Sterling drafted a new revocable living trust. He restructured my assets so that nothing was held in my individual name anymore. He drafted a new will. He drafted a new healthcare power of attorney, naming Beau as my primary agent and Sterling as the backup. He drafted an affidavit from Dr. Pham, my regular physician, attesting to my lifelong mental clarity. He drafted a sworn statement from my pastor of 22 years saying the same. He drafted statements from 3 former business partners. He drafted a statement from the bank manager who had handled my accounts for 14 years. Renee built her file on Dr. Pesh, on Trent's finances, on the affair, on the parking lot meeting. She found 2 other elderly people Dr. Pesh had evaluated in the last year and tracked down their families. One of them, a woman in Hickory whose mother had been diagnosed with dementia and moved to a locked memory unit by her brother, was willing to talk. Renee recorded the conversation. The woman cried for most of it. On the 3rd week, on a Wednesday, Renee called me. I have the recordings, she said, all of them. 11 separate files. Wesley's been keeping them on a thumb drive hidden inside an old game cartridge in his bedroom. He left it in the pocket of a jacket he donated to a coat drive at his church last week. He told me where to look. I have it. He told you? He passed a note to a girl at his church youth group. She passed it to her older sister, who works at the bookshop next door to my office. The sister came in yesterday afternoon and asked to speak to me privately. Wesley figured out who I was from his father overhearing his mother on the phone. He's a sharp kid, Buck. He's a very, very sharp kid. I had to sit down on the kitchen floor. I had to sit down on the floor of my own kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, and I had to breathe in and out for a long time before I could speak. What's on the recordings? Everything, Renee said. Goldie and Trent discussing the timeline. Goldie coaching Trent on what to say to Dr. Pesh. Trent asking Goldie if she's sure she can go through with it. Goldie saying, and I'm quoting, "He stopped being my father the day he kept Mom on those machines for an extra week to make himself feel better. I'm just collecting what he owes me." That's on the 3rd recording. There's worse. There's a recording where they talk about whether Wesley is going to be a problem. Goldie says she'll handle Wesley. Trent says, what does that mean? She says it means Wesley's going to a boarding school in January, and he's not coming home until he's 18. I closed my eyes. They were going to send him away. They were going to send him away. He knew. That's part of why he started recording. The other part is that he loves you, Buck. He loves his grandfather, and he figured out that the only person in that house with any moral compass left was a 15-year-old boy. I sat on my kitchen floor, and I cried for the 2nd time in a month. I cried for Wesley. I cried for the daughter I had lost a long time before this, and only just now understood I had lost. I cried for Helene, who had loved that little girl so completely and who would never have to know what that little girl had become. The hearing was set for December 14th, 8 days before Christmas. Goldie's lawyer, a man Sterling had never heard of, filed all the standard motions. They expected an uncontested proceeding. They expected Dr. Pesch's evaluation. They expected a confused old man to be wheeled into the courtroom by his loving daughter and quietly assigned a guardian. What they got was a 68-year-old man in a navy suit walking in under his own power, carrying a leather folder, accompanied by an attorney with 40 years of experience and a forensic psychiatrist from Duke, and a private investigator and 3 character witnesses and a pastor. Goldie's face when she saw us walk in is something I'm going to carry with me until I die. The way it went from polite confusion to something colder, harder, like a thin layer of ice forming over a pond. Trent's face went pale. They looked at each other, and they looked at us. And they looked at their lawyer, who had no idea what was happening either. Sterling presented Dr. Birdwell's evaluation. He presented the affidavits. He presented the affidavits. He presented my updated estate documents. He presented Renee's surveillance photographs of Trent and Dr. Pesch. He presented the woman from Hickory's recorded statement. He presented Heartline Development's financial records and the documentation of the affair. And then he presented the recordings. 11 of them. He played 3 for the court. He played the one where Goldie said I had stopped being her father. He played the one where Trent said he wasn't sure he could go through with it, and Goldie told him to be a man. He played the one where they discussed sending Wesley away. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Honorable Lillis Caramore, listened to all 3 recordings in complete silence. When the third one ended, the courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the heating system in the walls. She removed her reading glasses. She folded them. She set them down on the bench. She looked at my daughter for a long time. Then she looked at me. And what I saw on her face was not pity, which I had been afraid of. It was respect. The respect of one person who has seen the worst of human nature looking at another person who has just survived it. She dismissed the petition was prejudice. She referred Dr. Pesch to the state medical board with a recommendation for criminal investigation. She referred Trent to the district attorney for potential fraud and conspiracy charges. She ordered a separate hearing on Wesley's custody, and she ordered that pending that hearing Wesley would reside with his grandfather, effective immediately. Goldie stood up and said, "Your Honor, please," and the judge looked at her and said, "Ma'am, you will sit down or I will have you removed from this courtroom and held in contempt. You are no longer in a position to address this court." Goldie sat down. Wesley was in the hallway outside. He'd been waiting with Sterling's paralegal during the hearing. When the doors opened and I walked out, he didn't run to me, because he wasn't that kind of boy. He stood up from the bench he'd been sitting on. He looked at me. I looked at him, and then I walked over and I put my arms around my grandson, and he put his arms around me, and we stood there in that hallway for what must have been a full minute, and he didn't cry, and I didn't cry, and we just held on. "Did it work, Grandpa?" he said into my shoulder. "It worked, son. You did it. You did it." He pulled back and he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand the way 15-year-old boys do when they don't want anyone to see, and he said, "Can we go home now?" I said yes. We could go home. He's lived with me now for almost 11 months. We're getting through it. He had nightmares for the first couple months, and he didn't talk much for the first couple weeks. But he started talking again about Christmas Eve, and he hasn't really stopped. He's smart, my grandson. He's funny in a quiet way. He's good with engines. He helped me rebuild the carburetor on the old tractor last spring, and we got it running for the first time since Helene was alive. He cried a little when it started. So did I. Trent is currently in the middle of a federal fraud investigation and is, last I heard, living at his mother's house in Greensboro. The affair did not survive the bankruptcy. Goldie filed for divorce in April. She lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Charlotte and works in real estate, although not for any firm that anyone has heard of. She has called me twice. The first time she screamed at me. The second time she cried and said she was sorry and asked if she could see Wesley. I told her that was up to Wesley. He said no. He said no every time. My will, the new one Sterling drafted, leaves everything I have to Wesley in trust with provisions for his college and his future. There was a clause that says my daughter Marigold receives nothing. Sterling asked me 3 different times if I was sure about that clause. I told him 3 different times that I was. I am sure. I loved her once. I loved her completely. I loved her when she was a baby, and I loved her when she was a difficult teenager, and I loved her when she stood at her mother's grave and refused to take my hand. I loved her in October when she made me pot roast in a kitchen full of cameras and recording devices, and her own son was upstairs trying to save my life. I loved her. I love what she was. Before she became what she became, but I am not required to love what she has become, and I am not required to leave my money to a person who tried to lock me away to get it. Wesley starts his junior year of high school in 2 weeks. He's thinking about engineering school. He's looking at NC State and Georgia Tech. He has friends now, real friends, not the curated playdates his mother used to allow him. He has a girlfriend who comes to dinner on Fridays and calls me sir, which I keep telling her she doesn't have to do. Last Sunday we drove out to Helen's grave. Wesley brought yellow chrysanthemums. He'd never met his grandmother, but he asked me about her constantly that first month, and he knows her favorite color now. We stood there for a while in the cold. He put the flowers down. He stepped back. "Grandpa?" he said. "Yeah. Do you think Grandma would be proud of us?" I thought about it. I thought about the woman I had married at 23. I thought about how she would have held this boy if she'd ever gotten the chance. I thought about how she would have stood beside me in that courtroom. I thought about how she might have felt about our daughter at the end. And I knew, because I had known her for 46 years, exactly what she would have said. "She'd be proud of you, son," I told him. "She'd be so proud of you." He nodded. He took my hand. He's 15.5 years old, and he's almost as tall as I am. And he took my hand right there in the cemetery the way he used to when he was 4. We walked back to the truck. I started the engine. We drove home. The farmhouse was lit up because we'd left the porch light on. The dog, a hound Mix Wesley had picked out at the shelter in February, was waiting at the door. We went inside. We made supper. We ate it at the table where my daughter used to do her homework, and where, for whatever the rest of my life turns out to be, my grandson will sit across from me and we will pass the salt, and we will talk about his day, and we will not, either one of us, ever again be a person who can be taken from the people he loves. That's the story. That's how it happened. That's what saved me. A phone call from an old lawyer on a Sunday afternoon. A note slipped into my hand by a boy in a hallway. A thumb drive in a coat pocket donated to a church. The smallest things. The smallest, bravest things. They turned out to be enough. I've had 11 months now to sit with what happened, and I think about it most mornings when I'm making coffee for me and Wesley before he heads to school. The thing I keep coming back to is how small the moments were that saved my life. Not the courtroom, not the lawyers, not even the recordings. The thing that saved me was a phone call I almost didn't answer because I was running late, and a note slipped into my hand by a boy who could have looked the other way and didn't. I believe now that nothing in a person's life is random. Goldie didn't wake up one morning and decide to take my house and my freedom. She built her way to that decision over years, one resentment at a time, one rationalization at a time, until the daughter I raised was buried under the woman she chose to become. And I had a part in that too. I was so busy mourning her mother that I missed the signs. I let the silence stretch too long. I told myself she just needed time. Every action has its echo, and the echo of my looking away was that she had room to grow into something I no longer recognized. Wesley taught me something I should have known at his age and didn't. Courage isn't loud. It's a 15-year-old boy in a hallway, slipping a piece of paper into his grandfather's hand and not looking back. That's all it was. He didn't have a plan when he started recording. He just had a sense that what was happening in his house was wrong, and he refused to let the wrongness happen in silence. He chose the harder thing. He chose it alone, and the trajectory of 3 lives changed because of it. If there's anything I want a younger man watching this to take from my story, it's that your character is built in the rooms where nobody is watching. Goldie thought no one was watching, She thought the recordings were hers. The doctor was hers. The outcome was hers. But there is always a witness. Sometimes the witness is your own child. Sometimes the witness is your conscience waiting to send the bill due years later. The shape of a person's life is the shape of a person's life, is the shape of their private choices made public over time. I lost my daughter. I won't pretend the win in that courtroom didn't come with that loss attached to it. But I gained back my life, and I gained a grandson who knows now what it costs to do the right thing and what it costs not to. He will carry that into every room he walks into for the rest of his days. That is worth more than the house, more than the trust, more than anything in the bank. Be sharp. Be kind where you can, but be sharp. Watch for the people who start asking questions about your accounts before they ask how you're sleeping. Keep a lawyer who answers his phone on Sundays. And if a young person in your life shows you that kind of quiet bravery, honor it. Honor it with everything you have left.